My wife said, "I'm pregnant, but not from you," and started demanding alimony from me for a not mine child. She regretted it. Hey everyone, before I start, I just want to ask for a quick favor. If you enjoy reading these personal stories, please consider subscribing, liking, and turning on notifications. It really helps because not many people stay until the end, and that makes it harder for the channel to grow. Alright, thanks for that. Now, let's get into it. Hi Reddit. I used to believe I had the perfect marriage. I know it sounds naive, but for years, I was convinced that my wife, Sophia, and I were truly happy. We had this deep history, this connection that felt unbreakable. We met in college, me, a business major hustling to build a future, and her, a passionate education student who wanted to change the world. From the very beginning, she supported me in ways I never even asked for. When I was pulling all-nighters trying to get my startup ideas off the ground, she was there, making sure I ate, proofreading my presentations, and constantly reminding me that I was going to make it. Even when I doubted myself, she never did. When I finally took the risk and launched my own company, she was my biggest cheerleader. I felt like I had hit the jackpot. Not just in business, but in love. We got married right after graduation. At that time, my business was barely off the ground, and she had just started her first job as a teacher. Money was tight, but we didn't care. We rented a tiny apartment, bought secondhand furniture, and found joy in the simplest things. I remember us sitting on the floor one night, eating takeout because we couldn't afford a dining table, and she just smiled at me and said, "One day, we'll laugh about this." And we did. As my company grew, so did our life. We moved into a bigger apartment, then a house. We upgraded our car, went on vacations, and started living comfortably. I worked my ass off to give us a good life, often putting in 70-hour weeks, but I always made sure to carve out time for her. I thought we were solid. I thought we were happy. But then, things started to shift. At first, it was subtle. She stopped asking about my work. The woman who once sat up with me, excitedly discussing my business plans, now seemed bored whenever I brought it up. When I closed a huge deal, she barely reacted. I told myself she was just stressed from work, that maybe she was tired. But then, little things started piling up. She started going out more, saying she was grabbing dinner with coworkers. That was fine, until her stories didn't always add up. She would say she was with one friend, but then I'd hear from someone else that they hadn't seen her that night. Her phone, which she used to leave around the house, was suddenly always with her, face down. She started working late, but when I offered to pick her up, she always declined. I didn't want to be that paranoid husband. This was Sophia, my wife, my best friend, the woman who stood by me when I had nothing. I told myself I was overthinking things, but I couldn't shake the feeling. One night, when she was in the shower, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone, and my entire world collapsed. There were messages from a number I didn't recognize. Flirty, intimate messages. Things no wife should ever be saying to another man. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again? I miss you." And the worst one, I can't keep lying to him forever. I felt physically sick. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through months of messages, realizing that while I was breaking my back to give us a good life, she was off with someone else. I didn't confront her immediately. I couldn't. I needed more proof, needed to be sure. So I watched. I listened. And the more I paid attention, the more obvious it became. The late nights. The fake excuses. The sudden emotional distance. My perfect marriage had been a lie. When I finally confronted her, I expected tears, an apology, maybe even a desperate attempt to fix things. But all she said was, "I didn't mean for it to happen." That was it. No remorse. No explanation. Just a hollow excuse, as if she had tripped and fallen into an affair by accident. I walked out that night. I didn't pack anything. I just left. I drove around for hours, replaying every moment of our life together, trying to pinpoint the exact moment she stopped loving me. The next day, I filed for divorce. She didn't fight it. After everything we had been through, after all the years we had built together, it ended just like that, with a few signatures and a quiet, detached acceptance. It has been a year now. I won't pretend I'm fully healed, but I'm moving forward. I've thrown myself into my work, into rebuilding my life without her. Some days are better than others, but I'm getting there. If I've learned anything, it's that sometimes the person you think you know best is actually a stranger. What do you guys think? Have you ever been blindsided like this? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. At first, I didn't think much of it. Life changes, people change. We had been together for years, and I told myself it was just a phase, that stress from work or routine fatigue was making Sophia a little more distant. But as time went on, it became impossible to ignore. Sophia wasn't just distant, she was cold. The warmth that once defined our relationship had faded into something mechanical, almost forced. Conversations felt hollow, like she was going through the motions rather than actually engaging with me. I try to joke with her, try to bring back the easy laughter we used to share, but she'd just give me a tight-lipped smile, mutter something non-committal, and go back to whatever she was doing. And then, there was her sudden interest in my finances. Sophia had never cared about money before. When we were struggling in the early days, she was the one who reminded me that we didn't need luxuries to be happy. But now it was different. She started asking oddly specific questions about my income, my assets, even my business accounts, things she had never shown any interest in before. At first, I thought she was just curious, maybe trying to understand more about how my work functioned. Then, I caught her taking pictures of my financial documents. I remember the exact moment. I had left some paperwork on my desk, bank statements, contracts, investment summaries. I walked into the room and saw her holding her phone up, snapping pictures like she was gathering evidence for something. "Sophia, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She jumped, almost dropping her phone, and then, with the worst attempt at nonchalance I had ever seen, she muttered, "Oh, I just wanted to organize things. In case we need them later." Need them for what? That moment should have been my wake-up call, but I didn't want to believe the worst. I told myself I was overreacting. She was my wife, the woman who had been by my side since college. Maybe she just wanted to feel more involved in our finances. Maybe she was planning something for us, a surprise investment, a future home, something. But the signs kept coming. She started checking my accounts. I'd walk past her and see our banking app open on her phone. I never hid anything from her. She had access to everything. But she had never cared to look before. Now, she was constantly checking balances, scrolling through transactions, almost as if she was tracking something. And then, her schedule became strange. Sophia had always been a creature of habit. She liked routines, predictable days. But suddenly, she was disappearing in the evenings. At first, she said she was staying late at work, which made sense. Teachers had meetings, grading, extra responsibilities. But then, it started happening more frequently. Then, the lies started. One night, she told me she had a faculty dinner and would be home late. I didn't think twice about it, until I happened to drive past the restaurant she mentioned on my way home and saw no sign of her or any gathering. I didn't confront her that night. I just waited. She came home past midnight, smelling faintly of alcohol, her hair slightly messy, and when I asked her how the dinner was, she hesitated. Just for a second. Then she smiled. "Oh, it was fine. Boring, really." Something in me shifted at that moment. I started paying attention, watching the little things I had ignored before. The quick glances at her phone, the way she angled the screen away from me, the sudden work emergencies that pulled her away at odd hours. I wasn't the paranoid type. I never had a reason to doubt her before. But now, I had a sinking feeling that my perfect marriage wasn't so perfect after all. Sophia's changes were small at first, easy to overlook. But as time went on, they became impossible to ignore. She had never been one to spend much on herself. Even when we started making good money, she never cared for expensive brands or unnecessary shopping sprees. But suddenly, she started buying things that didn't fit her usual style, designer handbags, expensive dresses, and lingerie that I had never seen her wear. At first, I thought maybe she just wanted to treat herself. We were in a comfortable place financially, so I didn't question it. But the strangest thing was that none of these new things ever made an appearance at home. Whenever we went out together, she wore the same clothes she always did. The expensive dresses stayed hidden away, the new shoes remained untouched, and the fancy perfume she had bought was never something I smelled on her. I started to wonder, if she wasn't dressing up for me, then who was she dressing up for? That question began eating away at me, and once I started paying attention, I noticed more. Her phone became an extension of her hand. She had never been overly protective of it before. Sometimes she even left it lying around unlocked. But now, she took it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. It was always face down on the table, and every time a notification came through, she'd glance at it quickly and then lock the screen before I could see anything. One night, we were watching a movie, and her phone buzzed. She grabbed it so fast that it caught my attention. "Who's that?" I asked casually. She didn't even look at me. "Just work stuff." At 11 at night, I let it slide, but I started watching her more closely. The next time I saw her texting, I reached for her phone as a joke. "Who are you gossiping with?" She pulled it away so fast it was almost reflexive. "No one, just a friend." "What friend?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "You don't know them," she said quickly, tucking her phone away. That moment stuck with me. It wasn't just her words, it was the way she reacted, as if she had something to hide. Then there were the inconsistencies in her stories. One night, she told me she was meeting coworkers for dinner. I didn't think twice about it. until I happened to check her social media later and saw that one of the co-workers she mentioned had posted photos from that night. Sophia wasn't in any of them. I felt a knot in my stomach. The next day, I casually asked her how dinner went. She hesitated for a split second before giving me a generic answer. It was fine. Just the usual boring work talk. I nodded, pretending to believe her. But in my mind, I had already made the decision. I needed more than just a gut feeling. I needed proof. That was when I checked something I had never looked at before, her bank statements. I logged into our shared account, expecting to see the usual expenses, groceries, bills, and the occasional shopping trip. But what I found made my blood run cold. There were transactions for restaurants I had never been to with her, hotel charges, rideshare payments at odd hours of the night, expensive clothing stores where she had spent hundreds, sometimes thousands, of dollars. It wasn't just one charge. It was a pattern. Over the past few months, she had been spending money in ways that made no sense. Sophia wasn't just acting strange. She was hiding something. And now, I had the first real proof that my suspicions weren't just paranoia. Once I saw the bank statements, I knew I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The late nights, the expensive clothes she never wore around me, the guarded phone, it all pointed to something I didn't want to admit. But I needed proof, something undeniable, something I could throw in her face when the time came. I started watching her more closely, tracking the nights she claimed to be out with coworkers, noting the times she left and came home. Her excuses were becoming sloppier, her stories full of small inconsistencies. One night, she told me she had a staff dinner after work, but when I casually asked which restaurant, she hesitated before giving me the name of a place I knew she didn't like. That was the night I decided to follow her. I waited until she left, giving her a head start before grabbing my keys and heading out. I kept my distance, my heart hammering as I trailed her car through the city. She didn't drive toward the restaurant she had mentioned. Instead, she took a longer route, turning onto quieter streets, as if she was making sure she wasn't being followed. Finally, she pulled into a hotel parking lot. I parked a few spots away, my stomach in knots, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. I told myself there had to be an explanation, but deep down, I already knew. Then he appeared. A man walked out of the hotel entrance, tall, athletic, dressed in casual sportswear. He smiled as he approached her, his body language too familiar, too comfortable. When he placed his hand on the small of her back, guiding her inside, I felt my world crack apart. Nick. I recognized him immediately. He was a coach at a local sports organization, someone Sophia had mentioned a few times, always in passing. She had even shown me a picture once when talking about an event at her school. I remember her brushing him off as just another guy she worked with. But now I knew better. I took out my phone, snapping photos as they walked inside together. I sat there, staring at the hotel entrance long after they disappeared inside, my mind blank except for one painful truth. My wife had been lying to me for months. I waited. An hour passed, then another. Finally, they walked out, laughing, her arm wrapped around his like they had no care in the world. She had never looked that happy around me in a long time. That was all the confirmation I needed. I spent the next few days gathering evidence. I checked our phone records. His number showed up constantly, with late-night calls and endless text exchanges. I searched through her emails, finding hotel confirmations under her name, booked for weekday evenings when she claimed to be working late. I managed to access her messages while she was in the shower, screenshotting texts from him saying how much he missed her, how he couldn't wait to see her again. I printed everything: photos, bank statements, hotel receipts, messages. A stack of proof, undeniable and crushing. I had spent years building a life with this woman, believing we were in this together. Now, I was holding evidence that it had all been a lie. Sophia came home late that night, as she had so many times before. But this time, there was no excuse, no fake explanation. She walked in, her face unreadable, and for the first time in a long time, she looked directly at me instead of past me. There was no hesitation, no attempt to act as if everything was normal. She knew. Somehow, she must have known that I had figured it all out. She sat down across from me at the dining table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, as if she were about to deliver a rehearsed speech. For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression calm, controlled, completely devoid of guilt or shame. Then, in a voice so steady it almost felt practiced, she said the words that would shatter whatever illusion was left between us. "I'm pregnant, but not with your child. I want a divorce." The words didn't hit me all at once. It was as if my brain refused to process them, like they were just meaningless sounds strung together. I stared at her, waiting for something, an apology, a flicker of regret, even just an ounce of hesitation. But there was nothing, just cold, absolute certainty. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even trying to soften the blow. As I sat there, silent, trying to force myself to breathe, she leaned back slightly and continued, as if she were simply handling business. I know this is difficult for you, but I've thought it through. I sacrificed my career for you. I put my life on hold so you could build your company, so you could succeed. And now, I expect to be compensated for that. Compensated. The word made my stomach turn. She wasn't asking for a clean break. She wasn't even pretending that this was about emotions. In her mind, I was nothing more than an investment she had made, and now she wanted her payout. I forced my hands to stay still, to keep my expression neutral, to not let her see the storm of emotions boiling beneath the surface. I had spent weeks preparing myself for this confrontation, running through every possible scenario. But somehow, I hadn't expected her to be this brazen, this unashamed. She actually believed I was going to take care of her. She truly thought that after everything she had done, after lying to me, betraying me, and carrying another man's child, I would willingly hand her a financial safety net. I could feel the anger rising, threatening to spill over, but I refused to let her see it. I had one advantage left: she underestimated me. So I took a slow breath, steadied myself, and prepared my response. I looked at Sophia as she sat across from me, her face calm, composed, convinced she had everything figured out. She thought she had won. She believed she had maneuvered herself into a position where I would have no choice but to take care of her, to fund the new life she was planning with another man's child. But what she didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment long before she even realized I knew the truth. I had spent weeks consulting with lawyers, restructuring my finances, making sure that when the time came, she would walk away with far less than she expected. I had moved assets, adjusted my income on paper, and done everything legally possible to protect myself. She thought she had me backed into a corner, but in reality, she had walked straight into a carefully laid trap. I met her gaze, keeping my expression neutral. I understand, I said simply, my voice steady, controlled. I wasn't going to give her the reaction she wanted. There would be no begging, no anger, no emotional outburst she could use against me. For the next few weeks, I played my role perfectly. I didn't argue, didn't fight her demands, didn't give her any reason to think I was working against her. She remained convinced that she had the upper hand, that I was just another man who would accept the consequences of her choices and pay for them without question. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. She pushed for alimony, stating that she had sacrificed her career to support me, that she was entitled to financial security after everything she had given up. She expected a significant sum, convinced that I owed her something for the years she had spent by my side. But when the court made its decision, her confidence cracked. She was awarded alimony, but it was a fraction of what she had anticipated. My careful financial adjustments had worked. On paper, I was earning far less than she had assumed, and my assets were structured in a way that left little for her to claim. She had walked into court expecting a fortune. Instead, she left with barely enough to sustain the lifestyle she had envisioned for herself. She didn't say much afterward. I could see the frustration in her eyes, the disbelief that things hadn't gone exactly as she had planned. But I never gloated, never rubbed it in. I simply nodded, signed the papers, and walked away. Let her believe she had won. Let her think she had taken something from me. Because the truth was, she had already lost everything that mattered. And as I walked out of that courthouse, free from the illusion of the life we once had, I felt nothing but relief. Sophia thought she had walked away victorious, but what she never understood was that actions have consequences. She had spent years cultivating an image of herself as a respectable, dedicated woman, a loving wife, a passionate teacher, an active member of her church, someone admired in the community. She had built her entire reputation on the idea that she was selfless and devoted, someone who had sacrificed for others. But I had the truth in my hands, and I wasn't going to let her rewrite the story to make herself the victim. I didn't act immediately. I waited, letting her settle into her false sense of security. She had gotten her reduced alimony, probably assuming that was the worst she would face. She still had her job, her social standing, and most importantly, Nick, the man she had destroyed our marriage for. She believed she had successfully moved on, untouchable and free from any real consequences. That illusion didn't last long. The first step was the sports club where Nick worked as a coach. I scheduled a meeting with the leadership, a formal and professional conversation where I presented everything I had gathered, screenshots of their messages, hotel receipts, and photos of them together when she was still very much my wife. The club prided itself on community values, on integrity, on being a positive influence for the youth they worked with. A scandal like this, an affair between a married woman and one of their trusted coaches, wasn't something they could afford to ignore. The fallout was immediate. Nick was called in for a meeting, blindsided by the accusations he couldn't deny. Parents started asking questions, rumors spread, and within days, he was out. No dramatic announcements, no chance to defend himself, just a quiet termination, a stain on his professional record that would make it difficult for him to find another respectable position in the field. Next was Sophia's church. For years, she had been deeply involved, volunteering, speaking at events, presenting herself as a woman of faith and strong moral values. She had always been proud of her standing there, of the way people respected her. I made sure they saw the truth. I didn't storm in or make a scene. I simply sent an anonymous package to the church leadership, printed screenshots, receipts, and a short note. This is the woman representing your faith. The response was swift. She was quietly removed from all positions. No more leading events, no more speaking engagements, no more being the trusted figure she had built herself up to be. When she finally realized what was happening, it was already too late. People whispered. Former friends avoided her. The respect she had once commanded disappeared overnight. But the worst betrayal for her wasn't from the community. It was from her own family. Sophia had always cared about her parents' opinion, about being the golden daughter who could do no wrong. She had convinced them that she had suffered in our marriage, that I had neglected her, that the divorce was simply the result of an unhappy relationship. But once everything came to light, that story fell apart. Her parents were devastated. Her father, a man who had always believed in loyalty and responsibility, was furious when he learned the truth. Her mother, who had once adored Nick when she thought he was just a co-worker, now refused to even look at her daughter. They stopped defending her, stopped speaking to her, stopped pretending they could support what she had done. And then, when she needed him the most, Nick did exactly what I knew he would do. He left. He had never been in this for the long haul. The affair was fun when it was secret, when it was just an escape, but now? Now it was a scandal. Now he was unemployed, his reputation damaged, and he had no intention of standing by a woman whose life was falling apart. He walked away, leaving her alone to deal with the wreckage. Sophia had destroyed our marriage without remorse, believing she could move on without consequences. But in the end, she lost everything: her job, her status, her reputation, her family, and the man she had thrown it all away for. I didn't need revenge. The truth had taken care of everything for me. Sophia had always cared about appearances. She thrived on the admiration of others, on being seen as the woman who had it all: intelligent, respected, a loving wife, a dedicated teacher, a woman of faith. She had built her entire identity around that illusion, and for years, she had convinced everyone, including herself, that it was real. But illusions only last as long as the truth stays hidden. Once everything came to light, there was no salvaging her reputation. The whispers never stopped. People who once invited her into their homes, who had trusted her and looked up to her, now crossed the street to avoid her. Her church, which had once been her strongest support system, had cut her off completely. Former friends no longer returned her calls. Even casual acquaintances pretended they didn't see her when they ran into her in town. But the real devastation came when she lost her job. Teaching had been her passion, the one thing she had always taken pride in. But in a profession built on trust, a scandal like hers was impossible to escape. Parents of students began raising concerns, questioning whether someone with such a history should be influencing their children. The administration, already wary of the controversy surrounding her, made their decision quickly and quietly. She was let go. Finding another job proved impossible. Every time she applied somewhere, people knew her name, her story, the mess she had created. The affair wasn't just gossip. It had turned into a cautionary tale, something people discussed in hushed tones as a warning of what happens when you destroy everything for temporary pleasure. No respectable school wanted to take the risk of hiring her, and as months passed, her savings dwindled. She had counted on Nick to be her safety net, to be the one who would take care of her when everything fell apart. But once he was gone, once he had abandoned her to deal with the fallout alone, she had nothing left. Her parents refused to help. They had been humiliated, ashamed of the daughter they once proudly spoke about. After everything she had put them through, after all the lies and deceit, they had finally reached their breaking point. They closed their doors to her, refusing to offer financial support or even a place to stay. Sophia had spent years believing she was the one in control, the one who could manipulate situations to her advantage, the one who could walk away from the life we built without consequences. But now, there was nothing left for her to control. No career, no home, no family, no safety net. The last I heard, she was living in her car. The woman who once looked down on others, who had believed she was too smart, too clever to ever face the consequences of her own actions, was now struggling just to survive. I never reached out. I never offered help. I didn't need to. She had made her choices. And in the end, she had to live with them. Sophia had always been proud, always convinced she was the one in control. Even when everything crumbled around her, she still held on to the belief that she could find a way out. She had lost her job, her reputation, and her family's support, but she still had one thing left, her alimony. It wasn't as much as she had expected, but it was something, a lifeline that kept her from complete ruin. But I wasn't finished yet. I had planned my final move carefully, knowing exactly how desperate she had become. She had no steady income, no prospects, and no one left to turn to. Every month, she waited for the payments, clinging to them like a drowning person reaching for a piece of driftwood. And that was when I made my offer. I contacted her through my lawyer, keeping everything formal and detached. The proposal was simple. I would offer her a one-time lump sum payment in exchange for terminating the alimony agreement permanently. The amount was fair, but far less than what she would have received over time. It was just enough to tempt her, to make her believe she could start over, but not enough to give her any real stability. She hesitated at first. Even in her desperation, she wanted to believe she had some leverage. But the reality was clear. She had no job, no savings, no security. She couldn't afford to refuse. When we met to finalize the agreement, she looked like a shell of the woman I had once known. The arrogance, the cold detachment, the confidence that she could manipulate any situation to her advantage, it was all gone. She was exhausted, worn down by the weight of her own mistakes. For the first time, she truly understood that she had nothing left. She signed the documents with a hand that barely stopped shaking. The moment the ink dried, it was over. There would be no more support, no more ties between us. She had played her final card, and in the end, she had lost everything. I walked away without another word. She had once believed she could control the outcome, that she could dictate the terms of our separation and shape the future to her advantage. But in the end, she had been the one left with nothing. And for the first time since this all began, I felt truly free. Sophia had always been reckless when it came to consequences. Even when she was backed into a corner, she still believed she could find a way out, that something or someone would rescue her. But life doesn't work that way. After taking the lump sum payout, she wasted no time burning through it. Whatever plans she had for a fresh start never materialized. Maybe she thought she could rebuild, find a new job, make things right. But her name carried weight now, the wrong kind. No one wanted to hire a disgraced former teacher with a reputation tainted by scandal. She had no support system, no stability, and worst of all, no ability to adapt. Within a few months, the money was gone. She hadn't invested it, hadn't saved it, hadn't used it wisely. She had spent it the way she always had, impulsively, short-sightedly, as if she were still the woman who could afford mistakes. But the world had moved on, and now she had nothing left. I hadn't thought about her in a long time. My life had taken a different path, one of success, stability, and genuine peace. The chaos she had once brought into my world was nothing more than a distant memory, a lesson learned. And then, one evening, I saw her. I had stopped at a gas station on my way home from work, distracted by a call, barely paying attention to my surroundings. But when I glanced up, I saw her standing by an old, beat-up car at the far end of the lot. She was thinner than I remembered, her clothes worn, her hair unkempt, her face etched with exhaustion. There was none of the confidence she had once carried, none of the self-assuredness that had once made her believe she could outplay everyone around her. Our eyes met, and for a brief moment, there was something in her expression, regret, maybe, or just the painful realization of everything she had lost. She hesitated, then took a step forward, as if she was going to speak. Maybe she was going to apologize. Maybe she was going to ask for help. Maybe she just wanted some kind of closure. I didn't wait to find out. I got in my car, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. Sophia had made her choices, and in the end, she had to live with them. Life moved forward, and I moved with it. The chaos, the betrayal, the pain, it all became something I left behind, like an old chapter in a book I had no desire to reread. I focused on my business, throwing myself into work not as a distraction, but as a way to build something greater. Without the weight of a toxic marriage dragging me down, I found success came easier, more naturally. Deals closed faster, opportunities expanded, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was in full control of my future. I traveled, seeing places I had once only dreamed about. I stood on the edge of cliffs in Santorini, walked through the neon-lit streets of Tokyo, and drank coffee in small Parisian cafes, finally experiencing the life I had worked so hard to build. I didn't just exist anymore, I lived. And then, when I least expected it, I met someone new. She wasn't like Sophia. She didn't come into my life as a savior, as someone pretending to be my biggest supporter only to tear me down later. She was real, honest, and completely different from anything I had known before. Being with her didn't feel like a performance, like something I had to constantly maintain or prove. It was easy, natural, and for the first time in a long time, I understood what happiness was supposed to feel like. I don't think about Sophia anymore. Not in anger, not in regret, not in any way that matters. The woman who once thought she could manipulate her way through life, who believed she would always come out on top, is nothing more than a distant memory. I don't need revenge. I don't need closure. The best revenge is simply to live a better life, and that's exactly what I'm doing. But what do you all think? If you were in my position, would you have done the same? Would you have handled things differently? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts.